America's Liberation Day is here. 2nd of April is when Donald Trump will be slapping reciprocal tariffs on India and several other nations. Even though the US president has said that he will be kind and more generous, nobody really knows what he will do to fulfill one of his biggest campaign promises. While there are concerns of trade wars and a recession worse than the 90s, Donald Trump also seems to be bringing together enemies. Yes, China, South Korea and Japan have decided that they will deal with the tariffs together. An unprecedented trio considering their past history of conflict. India, meanwhile, has had several rounds of talks in the last few weeks here in New Delhi as well as in Washington, D.C. with American officials, with the Indian Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal leading these negotiations. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has often highlighted the 100% tariff that India imposes on American agricultural products. She in fact pointed to similar tariffs imposed by other nations such as the European Union bloc with 50% on American dairy, Japan with a whopping 700% on American rice, and Canada with 300% on American butter and cheese. From alcohol to dairy, footwear, clothes and edible oils, several products will get expensive if Trump decides to hit India hard. Will that happen, or will the Modi government be able to ace their diplomacy game? Let's try and decode this for you on Global Mirror tonight. I'm joined by Mr. PK Basu. He is an economist. Let's welcome him on board. Mr. Basu, good evening. Namaskar. What is happening tomorrow? What are your expectations? Not just India, the entire world is waiting with bated breath as to what Donald Trump will be announcing. What does your hunch say? What is going to be happening tomorrow?
Well, President Trump has changed his rhetoric over the last 2 or 3 days, which has introduced an extra element of uncertainty into this process. He was looking at reciprocal tariffs, which are going to be very, very difficult to administer. If you have reciprocal tariffs on each country based on their own tariff rates, then it'll be incredibly difficult to administer that system, because every product that comes in will have different tariffs based on where it's originating from. And that is going to be extremely complicated to administer. So I think that over the last 3 or 4 days, maybe a week, the US trade negotiators have altered their approach. And the president has started saying that there's going to be a uniform tariff imposed on almost every trading partner. Substantially all is the exact language he's used. I expect that that'll be a relatively small amount, that perhaps a 10% tariff on all imports, some forms of reciprocity, a declining scale, depending on which countries are considered to be the most egregious protectors against US exports. So I think already we've seen that the biggest tariffs have been imposed on China, Canada and Mexico to begin with. But interestingly, for Canada and Mexico, there are now some exceptions for those products that are compliant with the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement that was signed in the previous Trump administration. So some exceptions there, but in general, those three are going to see the biggest impact. They're not going to see any substantial reduction, particularly China is not going to see any substantial reduction in the gamut of tariffs already imposed on it. Most people expect that India will be a beneficiary of trade diversion. In fact, the likely beneficiaries of trade diversion are going to be India, Japan, and South Korea, because these are the three countries that can supply many of the things that China would otherwise supply. But there is also a danger that if China isn't able to go into its largest market, a lot of Chinese excess capacity will be dumped on the likes of India, Japan, and Korea. So, in fact, we all need to brace for the consequences of tomorrow, what the US does, but also we need to make sure that we don't get too much of a diversion of dumped products from countries like China in particular into our market or into the likes of Japan and Korea. So while there's likely to be trade diversion in the sense that
Mr. Basu, do you
India,
think that,
Japan, Korea,
obviously India
Taiwan
must have taken this
are
into
likely to be able
consideration,
to
right?
replace Chinese.
Yeah,
Yes,
India must have the kind of negotiations that have been taking place. And you mentioned Canada and Mexico and China. These three countries have stood up to Trump this time around. They've slapped reciprocal tariffs themselves against the US. India has not been very aggressive in standing up against Trump, but it's been maneuvering its way very strategically, perhaps using the best of its diplomacy when it comes to gauging what perhaps might be going on Trump's mind, if that is possible.
I think you should first of all understand that Canada, Mexico, and China cannot really retaliate against the United States. The simple fact is that 77% of Canada's exports go to the United States. So Canada can respond in rhetoric. It can say that, yes, we are going to impose countervailing tariffs, etc. But it'll be a pinprick on the US relative to the impact on Canada. So yes, Canada and Mexico have responded with some retaliation. China has also retaliated. Primarily, what these countries are trying to do is retaliate against politically sensitive products, agriculture, etc., coming into their markets from the US. But it cannot be a proportional retaliation because the US has a big trade deficit, massive trade deficit with China. It has a pretty large trade, about $60 billion a year with Canada and a pretty large one, about $120 billion with Mexico. So large trade deficits, which basically means that there cannot be a proportional retaliation by those countries. Now, India so far has not really been thumped with any tariffs. We will see some for sure tomorrow. There'll be a change after Trump's announcement tomorrow. We're likely to see an increase in the tariffs that are charged on India's exports to the US. But the impact will be much less severe than it has been on China, Mexico, and Canada. And so the broad impact is likely to be somewhat positive for India because India is going to be able to gain market share in the United States. India's market share is about 2.7% of US goods imports. That market share over the course of the next 12 months should rise. It should rise to maybe 3.5% to perhaps even 4%. That's a very substantial increase. But the point is that we will also be charged additional tariffs unless we cut them. Now, so that it's a negotiating process. We've offered to cut a lot of the tariffs that are of interest to the United States. One of the interesting things that they've raised in recent weeks is rice. Now, India doesn't have tariffs, but what India does have is substantial subsidies for rice and wheat. India is by far the world's largest rice exporter. And if the US is to have an impact in the global rice market, then it would want India to reduce its subsidies. So that, of course, addresses the whole MSP issue. It is politically extremely sensitive in India. And so it'll be interesting to see if the US tries to do something with regard to rice tomorrow. If that happens, then it will make the negotiations very delicate. But broadly speaking, I think India stands to benefit over the next 12 months from what Trump does tomorrow, although the headlines initially will be, oh my goodness, we've seen a big increase in tariffs. Yes, there will be an increase in average tariffs that the US charges on Indian exports to that country, but it'll be
I'll tell you what, Mr. Basu, Trump won't mind the big headlines all over the world tomorrow.
By Canada, Mexico, China, and the EU. Yeah. Well, all over the world, we'll be watching out for a substantial increase in tariffs. There's no doubt that the US import tariffs are going to rise pretty much for everybody. But It is a differential increase, and I think India stands to benefit because of a likely diversion of U.S. imports away from the big trio, actually the big quartet. Those three plus the EU will be the bigger sufferers, and the likes of India, Japan, Korea, and even the UK, which is outside the EU, could be the beneficiaries of trade diversion from the big four entities that will see the biggest increases in tariffs that they pay.
You know, it's important, Mr. Basu, that you mentioned rice, because agricultural products are something that the White House press secretary keeps on talking about. And, you know, she keeps showing that pie chart with different tariffs that countries impose. And when it comes to India, it's 100% tariffs on agricultural products. So it'll be important to see what Donald Trump does on that. But as far as oil is concerned, help us understand, Mr. Basu, how that would really play up, because in his latest statement, he's just said 25% tariff on Russian oil as well. And India, of course, has been doing oil trade with Russia over the past few years. How will that angle play up tomorrow?
Well, what the U.S. does with regard to imports of Russian oil into the U.S. has no real impact on us. So with Venezuela, what they've done is that they have basically said that anybody buying oil from Venezuela will see some retaliatory imposts from the U.S. Nothing of the sort is likely on Russia. So with oil, I think the important thing that the U.S. is attempting to do, the Trump administration has been focused on reducing oil prices as much as possible by boosting U.S. production of oil. The U.S. is the world's biggest oil producer. It is also a net exporter of oil. And what it's trying to do is boost production. So far, the impact was really focused on the first 2 months after the U.S. election. And we haven't seen oil prices decline too much more. What will happen if the U.S. imposes a tariff on Russian oil coming into the U.S., that'll probably result in a glut of Russian oil going to other places, and probably at a cheaper rate. So India is likely to benefit from that too. Now, of course, there are some troubles in the oil market, and that has to do with Iran. The main trouble with Iran, of course, is that Iran is getting very close to having a nuclear weapon, and consequently, sanctions on Iran, which are already pretty tight, are likely to be tightened further, especially by the Trump administration, and perhaps even, there could be some sort of action, bombing campaign against Iran at some point. So that could disrupt the oil market sometime in the next few months. But the immediate impact tomorrow, I think, is going to be neutral to slightly positive for India from the oil impact. I mean, the oil impact really will be potentially a tariff on Russian exports of oil to the U.S. That will divert some of those Russian crudes to other markets, and most likely at a lower price. So India will not suffer too much from that. Now, I think the key thing with regard to the U.S.-Russia relationship is that the U.S. is trying to move towards a resolution of the Russia-Ukraine war. And the ultimate goal there for the Trump administration is to end that war. And the sanctions that were put in place against Russia by the Biden administration are things that this administration isn't keen on keeping in place for too much longer. Remember that the Biden administration put in place a whole bunch of new sanctions just in the last 5 to 7 days before Biden left office. So around 15th to 20th of January is when the last few sanctions were put in place, particularly for the diversion of ships, etc. I think those are things that this administration, the Trump administration, is not too keen on keeping in place for very long. So as long as the Russia-Ukraine situation comes to a resolution fairly quickly, any action that Trump takes against Russia tomorrow is likely to be pretty short-lived.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Let's see how this really moves forward, not just for India, but for all across the world. In fact, Americans as well are concerned whether retaliatory tariffs from several countries will impact their daily life and their daily essentials getting expensive. So we'll have to wait and watch how the Trump tariffs impact the Americans and the entire world. But thank you very much to you, Mr. PK Basu, for joining us on Global Mirror and giving us an understanding of what we can expect. Let's keep our fingers crossed. We'll hopefully meet again tomorrow and understand what has Donald Trump announced in those tariffs. America's Liberation Day, ladies and gentlemen, is what he's calling the 2nd of April. With that, we'll leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on Global Mirror. Up